of mothers. That was not the point. It was just we sometimes forget about the importance of other individuals that don't have that blessing of being a mother. And that's what the purpose of the message was really about. But of course, that title always gets everybody's attention there. So, but I hope you'll enjoy this message tonight. And I was warned that it was going to be a little bit warm here this evening. And I'll tell you this one story, and then I'll get started. But some people believe I have a very loud voice is because I worked with a congregation that had a coal-burning heating system. And there was one particular individual that if it was below 70 degrees, he had that thing on. And he decided on one kind of cold August morning, he decided that he was going to kick that thing on. It was below 70. And of course, by the time 11 o'clock hit, it was hot. And I had to preach that evening. And I just remember the audience with their eyes rolling the back of their head because it was so hot in there. So that's why I always talk loud, so I get their attention. So, you know, once again, I no matter what the situation may be, whether it's hot or whether it's cold, or hopefully the message will be encouraging and edifying to you where you don't think about the temperature. So, and what I want to talk about here tonight is the Gospel of John. And I might have brought this up to you before, but there is many individuals that go out into the evangelism world to preach the message, and when they get the opportunity to go to someone who does not know about God or does not know about Jesus Christ, who does not know about the plan of salvation, the book that they are given is not necessarily a Bible in its entirety. As a matter of fact, they're not even given the Old Testament. They are given the Gospel of John and only the Gospel of John. And you probably would say that's kind of horrible because how is anybody going to know anything about God? But if you look through the Gospel of John by itself, you can understand if you go through these things and kind of follow along, then it increases our curiosity to find what else God has in store for you and I. It goes back to what we see there in John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31. It says, Jesus did many other miraculous signs that his followers saw, which are not written in this book. But these things are written so that you can believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and then by believing you can have life through his name. And that should be something that is very reassuring to you and I, that we read these things and we become curious about these things, and we see this love that God has for us, and how God was the Word, and that Word became flesh. We read there in the first chapter of John. And there's so many other things that I want us to kind of relay here tonight about why so many people would love to hand an individual the Gospel of John first and foremost and have them read through this. And there's a couple of things that I want us to think about here. If you think about the other Gospels that has been written, for example, if you go to the Gospel of Matthew, you can see through its language and through its lineage and through all the things that is talked about in Matthew in particular, you can understand that that is to a Jewish audience. Remember, the thing that they're really hung up on is where they come from. Is that not true? We see that they are the seed of Abraham, and you see that the first thing that they talk about in the Gospel of Matthew is how Jesus comes to this point. If you look there in the book of Ruth, I find it interesting that some translations, when it talks about Ruth being redeemed, having a redeemer, some translations says the words used kinsman. And that's appropriate as well, because the one that is going to redeem them is going to come through that lineage of Judaism. And Jesus came through that lineage of Judaism, and therefore he is the great redeemer. And so we can understand why Matthew, it kind of goes to these individuals that are familiar with that Old Testament and familiar with that old lineage and familiar with these things that brings up to this understanding of Jesus Christ. And then you go to Mark. And you see Mark is kind of hit it around with the Greeks. It's in that kind of language where you see that there is individuals that know the Greek language, that know and understand some of the things pertaining to where they're from and what they need to become. And you see some of the language that is used in there, especially some of the Aramaic, where you see that language, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. And you see where it comes to that conclusion, well, what does that mean? Because you could understand that some of the Jews thought it's talking about Elijah. And it's not. It's talking about my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And you can see why they would understand this. You also see in Luke, it goes towards the Gentiles. How does the Gospel of Luke and how does the book of Acts start out? O Theophilus. And you see where it goes to an audience that does not have necessarily a lineage. But one of the things that we find interesting in Luke is it does not go all the way back to Abraham. It goes all the way back to Adam. It's trying to show these individuals that don't really care much about this lineage of Abraham, but they can understand that this lineage brings them back from where it all started. And that's what the great thing is about Luke, is he's trying to put it in a language that they can all understand this. And he brings kind of historical accounts, and he brings references to events and individuals, and where they could say, yes, I understand exactly what he's talking about here. There is a guy, I think last name Ramsey, wrote the book Paul the Traveler and the... Oh man, that just escaped my memory. But he wrote about how at one time he did not believe that the book of Acts was historically accurate. And he wrote this book, Paul the Traveler and a Roman Citizen, that's the name of the book. And he tried to go out and try to disprove this book of Acts. But what he did, instead of trying to disprove it, the more and more he's convinced that this is accurate. More accurate than any Greek manuscript, more accurate than any Hebrew manuscript, more accurate than a lot of things that we let our kids read in history books. And he puts this in this validation of how the book of Acts should be something that we really pay attention to because of how accurate it is. And then you go to John. And John's plea is to everyone else. Remember, it tells us back to Mark chapter 16, verse 15, it says, go preach the gospel to every living creature. And maybe sometimes when we look at that passage, it's like, well, I'm not going to go preach the gospel to my dog Cookie, or I'm not going to preach to Marlo, or I'm not going to preach to Gene Simmons, the guinea pig. No, what he is trying to remind us here, when it tells us about the importance of preaching the gospel to every creature, there are some people at that time that has the perception that if you're not Jew, you're nothing. If you're not Gentile, if you're not a part of the group of Gentiles that come from a certain group, you're nothing. And he's trying to remind them, he goes, no, everybody's something. And everybody needs to hear this. And everybody needs to hear this message pertaining to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I want you to think about something here. Think about this. You go to John chapter 1, verses 44 through 46. And this is why I talk about why there's this importance to get out of this idea of who is from where, whose daddy you were, or whose family you were from, whose lineage you're from. Jesus is trying to remind us here that this message does not need to have someone that says, well, I'm from the seed of Abraham. It does not need a message to say to them, well, I'm from this certain place. And you see this kind of example when it comes to Philip. And we see Philip was in the town of Bethsaida, and the same as Andrew and Peter. And Philip found Nathanael and told him, he says, we found the man that Moses wrote about in the law. The prophets wrote about him too. He is Jesus, the son of Joseph. He is from Nazareth. And look how he responds. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? It's like, wait a minute, where's he from again? It's like for me to say that, can anything, if I'm a Buckeye fan, can anything good come out of Michigan? Or if I'm a Mountaineer fan, can anything good come out of Pitt? It's that kind of mentality where we think that because you're not from where I'm at, there's nothing good coming in. And Philip has this great statement here. Sometimes we overestimate what Philip is all about. And he says, just come and see. And you see this kind of change in Nathaniel. And it's not something that's really super miraculous, but Jesus remembers him and he comes to this conclusion, you must be the Son of God, because of this conclusion that he makes with Nathaniel. But we got to get out of this mindset, brother, and this is what's great about John. John is trying to remind us what is going to be good that comes out of this book. We have been kind of lambasted, brethren, that when it comes to Christianity, nothing good can come out of Christianity. And we see our society kind of telling us over and over and over again, because we don't have the same views as other people, and therefore nothing good can come out of Christianity. It's always been labeled and stereotyped and given the characteristics that we're just evil, we're exclusive, and we don't like anybody. And we also think we're the only ones making it to heaven. And just ask an individual, and they'll pinpoint just a handful of things that they have been told or they have studied and come to the conclusion that it really brings a negative aspect to it. But brother, let me tell you something though. There is something good that can come out of Christianity. And the problem is sometimes we don't work hard enough to show that something good could come out of Christianity. I had one lady one time, she came up to me, I was working at Lowe's, and she said, this lady, so-and-so, she's worried about making bills. And I said, okay. I said, well, let's do something about it. And this is going to sound really bad on my part. I always have money, and I'm always willing to give money, but for one reason or another, I didn't have money on me at the time. So I went to my store manager, and I said, hey, let me borrow $20. I went to another manager. I said, hey, let me borrow $20. They had no problem whatsoever giving me money. And what I did is I took that money and I gave it to her. I paid it back. But the point is, we think that we can't do anything because, well, I don't have all the resources on me right now. But we can. And the point I want to bring to you is this. She comes to this conclusion. Why are you doing this? You think about that. You think about how if you've done something good to someone that is a total stranger, that's the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, why would you do something like this? Why don't we say we give God the glory? Why don't we say because we do have a genuine concern for you? Why don't we carry these characteristics that we look over and over again in our scriptures? We look over and over again about having this love for one another, having this compassion for one another, having this consideration for one another, having this hospitality for one another. Why do we read these things over and over, but we don't put it in action? We need to put it in action because, brother, we're losing the battle of trying to draw people closer to God. We really are. And it's because we got to try harder than the next guy. And we got to try to prove to these individuals that we're not a bunch of hypocrites, and we're not a bunch of better than nows, and we're not a bunch of individuals that wants to kind of lord over people. We want to be individuals that show the things that Jesus was able to do while he was here on earth. That's what's great about Christianity. That's what good could come out of Christianity. And we have to work harder because there are so many people doing it the wrong way. And we're not only battling against the evil of this world, we're battling against the hypocrisy as well. Think about this. One of the things that I find encouraging is even the worst individuals, if you look at the Gospel of John, even the worst individuals can receive salvation. It's very interesting when I go home and I go to my high school reunion. And when I went to my 20 year, we're all sitting down, we're talking about what we do for a living. And there's Joel, he drives race cars. There's Patricia, she runs the squad. There's one that's a teacher. I can go on with some of their professions. And they come to me, and I say, I'm a preacher. and it's just like that. It's like, really? Jay, I remember what you were like when you were in high school. Yeah, I know. I had one lady at one congregation, she just kept saying over and over again some of the stuff I did, and I was like, oh, would you please stop? I don't need to be reminded of all the stuff I did when I was a kid. But she was my neighbor. But think about this, though, brother. Sometimes we say to ourselves that this individual, because of his past or because of her failings, because of her status, we just go on, and we say to ourselves, there's not a shot, but there is. Think about this. John chapter 16, verse 14. It tells us about how people saw these miraculous signs that come into the world. And this is in Galilee. And they come to this conclusion. It says, he must be a prophet who is coming into the world. The message that has been given here gives them the conclusion. That's what we strive for, is it not? When we talk about Christ and him crucified, that we want them to come to that conclusion that this is the Messiah, this is the Son of God, this is the one that has given us this hope of life eternal. You go there in John chapter 4, verse 46. And you see where Jesus comes to an individual. He says he went to Cana in Galilee again, and Cana is where he had changed the water into wine. And one of the king's important officials lived in the city of Capernaum, and that man's son was sick. Do you ever ask yourself who the king was? It was Herod Antipas. It's the same guy that's going to behead John the Baptist. And Jesus is going to perform a miracle on this guy's official. Why would we want to do anything for anybody that works for the enemy? Jesus did. It's very scary, brethren, how we are so wrapped up in our politics and we put it in our religion. And it's very scary sometimes on the principles that we stand upon, and we say that if we're not in this particular political party, then we're against God. Or if we are in this particular political party, you must believe in these things. And it's very scary too, brethren, that when we go and we try to do certain things, and when we go to our voting booths, and when we go to certain places, and if we vote for someone that is against someone else's view, then we must be the evil individual. Brethren, by all means, tell me, in the last 150 years, have we ever had somebody that held an office of the president or of the governor or of the Senate that held the principles of Christ? Not Reagan. I like Reagan too. Not Carter. I would venture to say, if you want to go that far, if you want to find somebody that had those principles of God, you'd probably have to go to Garfield. And probably some of you would say, oh, no, he was liberal, Church of Christ. But that's my point. Let's not strain at a gnat so we swallow the camel. And you'll be shocked to find sometimes in some political parties that they hold the same view as the others. But my point is this, though. Is Jesus looks at an individual And he says, yes, your son can be healed. And what he is trying to bring to this individual is to understand who Jesus Christ is. If you look there in John chapter 5, verse 7, it says, there's a sick man answers, says, sir, there's no one to help me get to the water when it starts moving. I try to be the first one in the water. This is the one that wants to go into that pool where the waters get stirred up. And when the waters get stirred up, everybody rushes there so they can be healed. And this individual, he can't get there. He says, someone always gets there before I do. This individual will not only be made whole, but be made whole by the Son of God. It won't be something that we have to wait for. Christ is right there before his very eyes. About 10 years ago, maybe even 12 years ago, we was having a gospel meeting down Marietta Reno. And I remember we sat at the Chinese restaurant with one of my friends. He was there to hold the meeting. And there was a guy I used to play softball with. And Josh said, he goes, hey, why don't you give that guy a flyer? And I said, Josh, I don't think that's a good idea. I said, I played softball with that guy. I know he does it in between games. I know his relationship with his wife is not good. I know there's other things that he was doing that I just don't think that's a good idea. So what he did is he got up and gave him a flyer anyways. And as I think of it now, I think to myself, shame on me. That I sit there and I said, no, I've already analyzed that this guy has no chance. But Josh said, no, he does have a chance. And he definitely will not have a chance if nobody never gives the invitation. Brethren, let's not sell ourselves short when we go out here in this world today and we see individuals that are struggling, that are going through drug problems, that are going through marriage problems, that are going through health problems, that are going through just some difficult things that it's hard for us to understand because we have never been put in that situation ourselves. And say to ourselves, this is too hard and I can't do this. Don't say that. Because that is giving Satan the greater opportunity to have that individual in their grasp. One of the beautiful things about John is he shows the example of certain individuals, and we would say to ourselves, if we understand the history of certain places and certain individuals, we say they don't have a shot, but they do. Consider this. How many times does he say the I am in John? For example, I am the bread. We all go to 1 John chapter 6, verse 66, and we talk about how some left and never came back again. But we forget about the importance of what Jesus is trying to explain to him when he tells him, I am the bread. When it comes to the nourishment of our bodies, sometimes we go almost to the point of gluttony sometimes. We make sure that when we get up, we eat. We make sure that noon, we're hungry, we eat. We wait till dinner, we eat. Sometimes we eat in between. And sometimes before we go to bed, we have a snack. Or we wake up in the middle of the night and we can't go to sleep, so we go find something to eat to put us to sleep. You think about how often we take the opportunity to make sure that we are physically nourished. Now ask yourself, when it comes to this bread that will never perish, how often do we feed ourselves? How often are we willing to just take a few verses? one of the things I find frustrating when it comes to individuals wanting to read the scriptures, they say to themselves, oh, I got to start at Genesis. Don't start at Genesis. Start at Obadiah. It would take you less than 5 minutes to read. Start at Titus. Start at Timothy. You can read both epistles of Timothy in less than 10 minutes. The only one, take it back. There are 2 books of the Bible that you'll probably have a hard time with. One's obvious, it'll be Psalms. But the other one they say is Genesis. Those are the 2 longest books in the Bible. And someone might have to correct me on that, but if I'm not mistaken, Psalms is definitely number 1, but Genesis is number 2. But there are so many other things that we could go, and we could just start reading the small stuff to get a better understanding of what our God's all about. How many epistles and how many little minor prophets? The reason they're called minor is because they're not less significant. They're minor because they're small and they're writing. But how many could you read in less than a half hour? Take the opportunity to take this bread that became flesh and read of him and learn of him. How about the light? Harold, you lived in Tyler County. You guys lived in Tyler County. You know, I used to live out Wick. And if you don't know where Wick is, just close your eyes and squint real hard, and that's Wick at night. And I used to, and Harold probably thinks I'm crazy because I don't think anybody would do it now, but I used to walk all the way from Wick, 8 miles, to Middleburn. And that was over the river and through the woods and over the hills. And I always knew when I got close to Middleburn, and the reason being is because they had 6 lights or 7 lights in Middleburn. And you could see them 5 miles away. Just knew I was getting closer when I got to Middleburn. In all this darkness, I know that I'm getting closer to the light and I'm getting closer to where I need to be. Brother in Christ is that same way. We are in a world of darkness, and we say that constantly about how this is a wicked world we're living in. This is a horrible world we're living in. Look how the people are in this day and age. Just over and over again, and we see this darkness happening in our world. But let's try to get some comfort in that light. And Jesus reminds us about he is that light. Or that door in John chapter 10, verse 7. We're trying to find our way. We know we have to go through a certain door. We have to go through a certain gate in order to get where we need to be. And Jesus reminds us there in John chapter 10, verse 7, that there is the way to God. I am that way. I am that door. We'll talk about that way here in a second. But we understand that if we want to go to Christ, we have to open the door. He has given us all the opportunity to come to him. It's up to us. The good shepherd. Remember, the sheep hears his voice and they follow him. And we talk about how when it comes to that good shepherd that he is making sure that we are taken care of. I've said this for the past couple of weeks because I've been doing this study, these textual studies. And one thing that is a constant is God puts something out there for our good. He's one of them. He's out there to take care of us. Think about this. He is the resurrection and he is the life. One of the things that I've been studying this past week, and if you listen to my sermon this morning online, we talked about how there's so many people divided over what Jesus was when he was resurrected. If you look at some religions, they believe that he resurrected as a spirit. He was not a physical being. Some people believe that he was just a spirit. But you also see some passages that talk about him being a spirit. But you also see some passages that tells us that no, he was touched, he was held, people grasped his feet. Mary tried to hug him and says, not right now, we got things to do. We see all these things that show that there's a tangible individual here. And when I look at, if somebody would ask me, well, was he a spirit or was he a body? I would say he was both. He was a glorious body. We see that in Philippians chapter 3, verse 18, where it tells us that it's no longer this, it is a glorious body. And that glorious body can be touched, and that glorious body can ascend, and that glorious body can appear and reappear like he did in front of his apostles. That glorious body was hungry. It just drives me, I just think it's awesome that it seems like when Jesus, if there's a common thing that Jesus was during his mission, he was hungry. But this body, though, that he comes in his resurrection is a glorious one. It's not going to be like this. It's not going to be some kind of ghostly spirit. It's going to be a glorious body, and we can't grasp that because we can't understand the things that has happened to Christ. But Jesus reminds us that you can have this too. You think about Jesus and all the things that he went through when it comes to his persecution and his crucifixion. And it should not surprise us that those individuals in the road to Emmaus and those and Mary Magdalene, when they had this opportunity to see Jesus face to face, they have a hard time recognizing him. It's not because he's like deformed or anything. It's because the last time I saw him, he was kind of grotesque if you think about it. Bloodied. Nails through his hands, crowns on his head, scourged and beaten with rods. It's not a pretty picture. And for me, it seems like it takes forever for me to get healed from some kind of a cut. It takes me weeks upon weeks. Here we see in 3 days, the only thing that's recognizable that he points out to Thomas is, look at my hands and look at my side. I truly believe everything else, there's not a problem. But he wants them to know he's whole. And that's the only remnants of his crucifixion. It's no longer a body of corruption. He also reminds us that he is the way, the truth, and life. I always talk about how if I want to go to Atlanta, Georgia, I'm not going to take the road that takes me to New York City. That idea that we say to ourselves that we're all going to heaven, we're all just taking different roads. No. Some roads just won't take you there. And some roads will make it extremely difficult. And I think Jesus talks about that when he talks about the straight and narrow. Few find it. Jesus reminds us in John chapter 14 that this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life. And how he is this true vine. Once again, we all be reminded about who our audience is here. We talk about where they're from. We talk about what lineage they come from. But sometimes we forget about who they are as people. How often do you read in the scriptures about vineyards? And for someone to come to them and talk about vineyards, it kind of perks up their ears, does it not? If somebody comes up to me or I'll walk by somebody and they say Saints football, what? we have those common interests. We have things that we really like, and we really like talking about them. So it's not surprising that Jesus will talk to individuals about the vineyard and about the true vine, where they say, I can understand this. Let me finish up with one more thing. I talked to Nathan about this last week, and he was telling me, he's like, hey, we're going to go see the Garden of the Gods. And I said, Nathan, I got a story about this, and it ties into John. I got to meet this lady, and I apologize, I got to put my glasses on because I do want to read some of this, and it just brings a stronger point here. This lady's name, and I'm going to send her a message tonight and tell her, hey, I did this sermon again if you want to listen to it. Her name is Terry Fitzwater Palmore, and she had a son named Cameron. And Cameron, on his way to work after school one day, got in an accident and he died. And it upset her because he was an individual that liked to go and explore nature. He liked to go see things. He liked to experience things. And one of the things that she wanted to do was, when she went to visit her other son, she wanted to take a picture of Cameron, her son. And she wanted to take it and she wanted to put it in the Garden of the Gods. And if you've ever been there, you know it's not easy to put it in a certain place, to keep it secure, to make sure nobody else messes with it. She wanted this picture there to just have Cameron, when someone would see this, they knew that Cameron loved this place. But she couldn't get to the place that she needed to be. And as she's trying to figure out what she wants to do here, she goes by some mountain or some climbers, and she goes up to one, and she says, "Would you please do me a favor?" His name is Mark, and she says, "Would you do me a favor?" She goes, "Will you take this picture with you, and would you put it up there where you're climbing, and just leave it there?" And he says, "I'll do you one better." He says, "How about this?" He says, "How about I not only take that picture you want me and put it up there in the Garden of the Gods, but we climb everywhere. And everywhere we climb, we'll take a picture of Cameron with us, and we'll put it there. And we'll take a picture to let you know that we put it there." And what they end up doing is, everywhere that they went, they took that picture of Cameron. They went to North Carolina, they went to Colorado Springs, they went all over the U.S., and every place that they went, they took a picture of Cameron. And then they took a picture of the cemetery. How wonderful is it that this is the same way the Gospel of John is for you and I? She wanted Cameron's love to be known to everybody, and these individuals was willing to take this picture and let everybody know how much Cameron enjoyed wildlife. Yes. God loved the world so much that he gave his only son, so that everyone who believes in him would not be lost but have eternal life. Brethren, if we can understand the beauty of just sending a picture to someone, and an individual is willing to carry it all over the nation so that people will know about him, then you understand the beauty of the Gospel of John. That this message was not supposed to stay here. There is a message, true and glad, for the sinful and the sad. Bring out that message. There's so many out there. Brethren, if we are pricked in our hearts about this love that God has for you and I, that he is willing to do this for you and me. What are you willing to do in return? There's an opportunity tonight. If there's one here who needs to make a change, to repent, there's an opportunity that we can fix that here tonight. Take the steps that we need to do to be children of God. We have an opportunity to do that. We have an opportunity to be buried in baptism. It's not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but it's a good conscience towards God, Peter reminds us. We have an opportunity to do that tonight as well. Maybe we need to pray about things. My week has been prayer. I've had a lady that lost her husband that unfortunately took his life. I have a lady that is in prison right now for a crime that she's going to have to do time for a long time. We pray. Our families, our friends, our brethren, the preacher that we just had here this past weekend at our congregation, he is probably on the road right now, maybe eating West Virginia's finest pepperoni rolls. Prayed for his safe trip home to Alabama. We can pray about things here tonight. Maybe we need to pray about something tonight. Let's take an opportunity to take these things and do things to bring us closer to God. And if you need to respond, won't you come while we stand, while we sing?